Since I set a goal to read the Captain Alatriste novels in English this year, I'm keeping up with that. Today I finished the SUN Over Breda. In Spanish it's called simply El Sol de Breda. I don't remember if I've recapped the second book here on the channel. It might have been one of those audios that I recorded that had corrupted playback issues or something, so I hope this one's recording well. But to just give you a 30-second rundown of each one so far. In the first book, in the 1620s in Spain, during the reign of King Philip IV, Captain Alatriste is a veteran of the Flemish Wars, and he's taken a young charge under his wing, the son of a late friend of his who once saved his life, so he owes him a favor. And he's a swordsman for hire in a labor market saturated with veterans, who are also swordsmen for hire. He gets hired to do a hit job by the Inquisition. He ends up not doing the job because he finds out that it's against a member of the English royal family. This ends up putting a target on his back, but through the favors of friends and through keeping his own personal code of honor, he's able to save his neck and becomes a friend of the English throne. In the second book, he's hired by a family. The book is called Purity of Blood, or in Spanish, Limpieza de Sangre. He's hired by a family to rescue their daughter from a convent where she's being abused by a priest, which, from what I understand, was a common problem in those days. And when they try to get her back, the priest says, quit hassling me or I'll denounce you as being of impure blood. Reason being that, with the power that the Inquisition had, they would assume that if you weren't of, pure Castellano, Catholic blood, that you could potentially be, a hazard to the church, to the faith, to the throne, to whatever. It was just an excuse to hassle people that they found to be inconvenient. Even though this family wasn't, hassling the throne or the church or anything, they just wanted their daughter back. And so they planned to break in and retrieve her, but there was a trap laid, and instead of Alatriste falling into the trap, his young charge Inigo Balboa does. And so the story is, the back half of it anyway, is about Alatriste doing what he can to rescue Balboa, from this Inquisition. And, and the daughter as well. So he's able to achieve that. And then the third book, El Sol de Breda, the SUN Over Breda, as a consequence of him constantly getting in trouble with powerful people in Madrid, Alatriste goes and re-enlists with his old tercio, his old military unit, and they go back to Flanders to continue the Flemish Wars, which have been going on with varying degrees of intensity for about 80 years at this point. The main cause is religious. Spain asserts the right of rule over the Spanish Netherlands, and Spain is Catholic, but there are, Lutheran rebellion pockets going on. There's separatists and stuff, and so it's a war of heresy. And they've got to take this city called Breda, and we see Inigo get his first real taste of combat. There's some siege combat and stuff. There were a couple of maybe valuable things to glean from this book, but as I read it, I just remember thinking, this is, especially compared to the last two, and especially compared to the first one, this is really dry and boring and kind of pointless. And then I had this, light bulb go off in my head, and I remembered, the last time I took a serious run at this book was in 2019, and I didn't finish it. I got bored with it. There's really not much of an arc. It's just Inigo's observations about wartime and how the Spanish army conducted itself, how often they would go for long periods of time, sometimes even years, without pay, how this manifested in mutinies and how discerning officers would either quell these by securing the pay for their troops or just executing the mutineers. These are heavily factual historical novels, and I feel like just for this one he went way heavier on the historical side and not so heavy on the novel side. There were a couple of developments, they find a Dutch heretic who's gravely wounded, and Inigo, who's still being young and not as jaded by the realities of combat as Alatriste is. He finds this guy after hours and tries to set him up and save him, and comes and finds Alatriste, and he's like, hey, is there something we can do for him? And Alatriste just stares at him, and he says a lot with what he doesn't say, because the obvious is there. He's like, you want to help an enemy of ours? But he doesn't chide Inigo for that. He's like, all right, well, you've got to learn. So by the time they get back to this Hollander is what they call him, this Nederlander heretic guy, he's already slit his own throat because he doesn't want to be taken captive, and he knows what that entails in the age of the Inquisition. They do a couple of other things. They lay siege. They show some of those combat tactics of the era, and there's value in it if you're trying to glean those particular details of the time period and of that lifestyle. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of story to recommend this particular installment. I can't remember which one is the fourth and which one is the fifth. The next two books, there's one of them is the King's Gold, and the other is the Cavalier of the Yellow Doublet. But I'm not going to jump into them right away. I do know that the books get longer as you go. And then I think book 6 is called Pirates of the Levant. It's interesting to see which words they use for the English titles versus the Spanish ones, because in Spanish, for example, it's called Corsarios de Levante, like Corsairs of the Levant. But what is a corsair? It's just a pirate. What's the word for pirate? Pirata. There's probably some distinction between those definitions. The reason why they chose that word over the other one, kind of the same way with the second book. Limpieza de sangre is literally cleanliness of blood, but purity of blood makes more sense in English, even though the word for purity is pureza, not limpieza. And I think those two words carry different connotations, like limpieza de sangre meaning like, in a sense of generations or genealogy, versus like saying pureza de sangre is like, do you have any contaminants in your blood? It might be a medical term type thing, versus in English saying purity of blood is different from saying cleanliness of blood. It's weird. And then the seventh book is Puente de Asesinos. From what I understand, that's the final book, and Pérez y Reverte hasn't written anything new in this series since 06 or 07. So, 17 years now. For all intents and purposes, the series is done. In fact, you can get an omnibus edition with some illustrations. I haven't seen the illustrations. I can't attest to their quality. But the book is just called Todo Alatriste, or, all Alatriste, or Alatriste incomplete, just, the entire thing. There were announced 2 other books. Supposedly some of the print copies from the mid-2000s had titles listed as forthcoming. I can't remember what they were, but maybe he just decided to end it where it was and not pursue it any further. Maybe he's like, yeah, I got an idea where I could chase it farther down the line, but then he realized he might have just had a SUN OVER BREDA on his hands. So I'm 3 books into a 7-book series, got 4 more to go. I'll let you know how they are. Content warning is about the same. There were a couple of F-bombs, there was some combat violence, and some cuckoldry. I think this was depicted in there to just once again show what those times were like. This is an era where a monarch who declared authority over a certain territory really had authority over all of his subjects, for better or worse, within that territory, and all of their earthly possessions. And as such, an occupied territory could be required to quarter troops. And this was the case in the book, where Alatriste and the men of his band, not necessarily under his command, because remember, his rank of captain is just a nickname. They've forced their way into the home of a Dutchman, and this Dutchman and his wife, and in order to kind of secure good treatment for himself and to save his neck, he's basically got to allow Alatriste to have a relationship with his wife in his own home. So, not exactly noble or chivalric as we understand these things, but I think Alatriste, since he's supposed to be a representative man of his time, but, for the most part, a character that we can root for because he's got some qualities we can admire. If he's supposed to be, representative of that era and of that lifestyle, of a hard-edged soldier, a veteran, a man with wounds, a man with scars on his soul, he's not going to do things that you can cheer for all the time, and this is, one of those instances. So it's just an observational historical novel, the third one, The Sun Over Breda. I gave it 3 stars because it was better to read it in the audio format once I got through some of the parts that were slow for me to try to read in print, at least at the time. Now that I think about it, when I was reading it, I was still recovering from an ortho surgery. And I had a really hard time reading things in print just because of the painkillers that I was on. Maybe that was half the problem. I would try to stare at a page and I would just be like my brain would shut down. But anyway, I'm glad I'm coming back around to it. The prose is still beautiful. There just wasn't much in this one for the narrative to recommend it. So I'm going to read a mecha book next, but I'll tell you about that one in the next video.